Welcome back to Levity Books. My name is Liam and I hope you've been reading well. Today we're talking about Swann's Way, which is the first volume of In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. Now, you've probably heard of In Search of Lost Time before. It's a French masterpiece. It's called À la recherche du temps perdu in French. And this work requires quite a complex review. So I've structured this review. I'm going to give a synopsis, and then I'm going to give a little bit of a reading, some historical context, my personal reading experience, and finally whether I'd recommend it. Stick around to the end because it's complex, because there's some conflicting views I have about this, but all in all it is worth the hype, but it's not worth every reader reading it right away. There is certainly a time in your life where you should read this, and I'm going to get into that later. In Search of Lost Time is a semi-autobiographical love story told chronologically in slow motion. By that I mean the narrator is a man very much like Marcel Proust, and the story is spread over 6 works because it's almost shows the development of Marcel's life. It goes right from the beginning to the end, and being in Swann's Way, we have Marcel as a young boy. Swann's Way has 2 central characters, Marcel and Swann, and Swann's Way, simply put, is about the pain of Marcel's first love and Swann's first marriage. Swann's Way, known in French as Du côté de chez Swann, literally translates as the path to Swann's house, and we're talking in this book about a path that goes from Marcel's house to Swann's house. And so this work, In Search of Lost Time, the first book, is really setting up the relationship between Marcel and Swann. That's the first way of seeing it. Another way of seeing it is that Swann's Way is about Marcel's first love and Swann's first marriage. The pain of both of these experiences are within these pages. Swann's Way has 3 chapters: Combray, Swann in Love, and Place Names the Name. The first is narrated by Proust as a young boy, the second is narrated by Swann as a young man, and the third is narrated by Proust as an older boy. Here are some excerpts to show you what we're dealing with when we're talking about Proust. It's hard to capture Proust in an excerpt because he writes in very long passages, but here are some of my favorites. So this one is on page 220, and it's talking about how Swann is idealizing his lover Odette to become some Renaissance painting. He sees her as a painting, and this makes her seem more beautiful. They enabled him, like a title, to introduce the image of Odette into a world of dreams and fancies which, until then, she had been debarred from entering, and where she assumed a new and nobler form. And whereas the mere sight of her in the flesh, by perpetually reviving his misgivings as to the quality of her face, her body, the whole of her beauty, cooled the ardour of his love, those misgivings were swept away, and that love confirmed now that he could re-erect his estimate of her on the sure foundations of aesthetic principle. While the kiss, the physical possession which would have seemed natural and but moderately attracted had they been granted him by a creature of somewhat blemished flesh and sluggish blood, coming, as they now came, to crown his adoration of a masterpiece in a gallery, must, it seemed, prove supernaturally delicious. So in that passage, it's showing how Swann is thinking of Odette as a Renaissance painting, and because of that, he can now find pleasure in his intimacy with her. And it's showing how idealization works in the mind. Proust really describes how this process works, and I think that's a lot of what we get from Proust's very descriptive writing. And here's another sentence that I really liked on page 301 of my edition. And as a matter of fact, Swann's love had reached the stage at which the boldest of physicians, or, in the case of certain affectations, of surgeons, ask themselves whether to deprive a patient of his vice or to rid him of his malady is still reasonable or indeed possible. This sentence is about how love can outlast lust, and in this case, Swann is trying hard to fall out of love, but he can't. And Proust is making an analogy to whether, like a surgeon, we have to extricate ourselves from love. I think the best way to consider Proust is to consider him as a pioneer alongside James Joyce and Virginia Woolf, as a pioneer of modernist fiction in the early 20th century. Proust, Woolf and Joyce started this writing style before the World Wars, which was just highly descriptive, had a stream of consciousness and multiple narrative points of view, got rid of arbitrary sections like chapters and paragraphs, and really tried to get closer to the psychological realism, telling a story through the thoughts that we have as everyday people, rather than these unnatural events that we have in some stories which just don't relate to modern life. And one thing I want to make a record of is Virginia Woolf's reaction to reading Swann's Way. She read it in 1922, a month after Proust died, and it shows that Virginia Woolf admired Proust's writing much more than James Joyce's writing. They were all writing around the same time, so it shows that Proust at least should be considered as a strong influence on modernist fiction. My great adventure is really Proust. Well, what remains to be written after that? I'm only in the first volume, and there are, I suppose, faults to be found, but I am in a state of amazement, as if a miracle were being done before my eyes. How at last has someone solidified what has always escaped, and made it too into this beautiful and perfectly enduring substance? One has to put the book down and gasp. The pleasure becomes physical, like sun and wine and grapes and perfect serenity and intense vitality combined. Far otherwise is it with Ulysses, to which I bind myself like a martyr to a stake and have, thank God, now finished. My martyrdom is over. I hope to sell it for £4.10. And as with Virginia Woolf's reaction, I agree that whether you follow or enjoy Swann's Way, when you're reading it, you will realize you are reading something profound, just in how strong an ideal it is, how descriptive it is, how unique it is. Reading Proust feels like taking a slow summer walk and appreciating every kind of beauty that you can see. The reason that Swann's Way, In Search of Lost Time, Proust's writing is renowned, I think, is because it is an extreme, excellent and exhaustive example of descriptive writing. If somebody ever asks you what descriptive writing is, it is Proust. Every sentence is clearly articulated, there is no ambiguity in what Proust means, and that's admirable. Contemporary novels use ambiguous wording to create suspense, but Proust doesn't want that. Proust wants you to experience exactly what's happening. Some of the main themes of Swann's Way are sexual jealousy, memory, recognition, and a lot of what Proust is writing about is how experiences like a smell or a sight can trigger an emotional response within us. In Harold Bloom's introduction, he makes clear parallels to the writings of Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalyst, and I think these are apt comparisons because this is a lot of what Proust is doing. He is trying to talk about the unseen areas of the mind, how we bring thoughts together, memories together, how we create associations. He's almost doing psychology before psychology really existed. This is so much the case for Swann's Way that film adaptations of Swann's Way are mostly just interior monologues. There's no dialogue. It's kind of hard to film Swann's Way or to talk about the events because it really is just, as I said, Marcel's first love and Swann's first marriage, but those as events are quite small. Most of the pages are dedicated to the thoughts and feelings surrounding these events. The first thing I realized when reading Proust is that he breaks three main writing conventions. He uses these invariably long sentences that you're normally told to do short and long and to use it for emphasis, to change the pacing. But Proust, he wants the whole story to kind of go at a gentle trot, and I've read long sentences before and say, Infinite Jest has tons of long sentences, but these sentences are full of a lot of prepositions just to make sure he knows that you know exactly what's going on. And there's a lot of precision to that, but there's also a lot of tangents to that. The second broken convention relates to this. We normally say show and don't tell in writing, but Proust is all about telling. Like, he is explaining everything and talking about everything. Swann's Way is vast. He's describing everything at once, and you have this almost present awareness of consciousness of being with the narrator. But it means that there's like very little emphasis, and for some people you're going to find it quite tangential, like you won't really know where the plot is going. For some people this could be a bit tiresome. Thirdly, Swann's Way doesn't really use paragraphs. There are a few places where there are stops in the text, so this makes it hard for people like me who read in short bursts. With Proust you have to read it in long sittings. Like, you need to read Proust for like an hour every sitting for you to really capture a segment of activity, to really remember exactly what happened when you last read it. Without reading in long periods, you're going to be stopping in the middle of conversations, and it's going to be hard to pick up the flow of Swann's Way when you get back to it. So now, on to my recommendations. So I'm 28, and I'm just going to say this bluntly. I don't think anyone under 30 should read In Search of Lost Time. I think you can read it whenever you want, but if you read it too early in life, you're not going to be able to relate to it as well as you could relate to it. And I've experienced that myself. I think that I am not old enough to get everything out of Proust. I think you need to be kind of married, settled in financially, psychologically, in every kind of way. Life has to be almost so monotonous and closed for you that you can then want to go back and look at the nostalgia of growing up and falling in love and the sexual jealousy that Swann experiences. All those things, I think, are better experienced when you are older. Of course, this is a prediction because I'm not that old yet, but I have a big hunch that I was too young to get everything out of this. Reading Proust for me wasn't massively satisfying. It was definitely good, but I can't give it any more than 4 stars. I give it 4 stars because it achieves this literary ideal of being a perfect descriptive text and really staying true to its focus and being very distinctive and a core modernist text. But I can't give it 5 star because I'm not really excited to finish the series, you know? I'm not gonna go and read In Search of Lost Time all in one let go like I originally thought I would. I wanted to do that, but it was from a place of naivety because I hadn't read Swann's Way. I hadn't read Proust. And so when I look online, I see so many people only read Swann's Way and then stop. Or they read it over a long period of time. And I think that's the right thing to do. Unless you are much older and you can instantly connect with it. But for me, I couldn't. Reading Swann's Way was a lot like reading The Rings of Saturn by W.G. Sebald for me. It's something I couldn't fully connect with, but I could appreciate its brilliance. It was something that has mainly a following of older readers. And I think it's because the themes are related to memory and to growing up, and I guess I'm not old enough to truly appreciate that style yet. I personally found Swann's Way to be very difficult for my attention span. I think readers with ADHD are going to find Swann's Way especially difficult, if it wasn't already. And then, of course, there's the length of the whole series, In Search of Lost Time, being, you know, almost one of the longest books in the world, like in the top 10. So all that combined, it's hard for me to give it 5 star, regardless of how amazing it is, because it's just not gripping enough for me to want to just go right on through it, and I can't really engage with it yet. But that's partly my own failings. So for all the readers who really like to know what the characters are thinking, really like to read formal, eloquent sentences, Proust is perfect. Proust will be a joy for you to read. At the very least, reading Proust is a lesson on being patient with love and growing up in life, and it serves as a great example of a book or a series of books which can really shape a reader's life. This is an example of a book that can really help readers change the way they think about the way they live. So if that is not a good reason to want to read Proust, then I don't know what is. That's all for now. Happy reading.